Hello, everyone, and welcome to this event. What do we mean with care? This session is a part of a series of events that stems from a staff development on research practices that Marketa Urinova and myself, I'm Caterina Albano, the coordinator of the PhD program at CSM, have organized in conjunction with the exhibition Invisible Processes, which is currently on in the Lethaby Gallery at Central St. Martin. And the exhibition is only on for another couple of days. I very much encourage you to see it. One of the theme and the issues that came up during our discussion with a member of staff, the exhibitor in Invisible Process, which showcases works by PhD works. So with PhD students who had and alumni from CSM, one of the issues that came up was care. And therefore, I'm delighted to welcome you to this session tonight. The exhibition Invisible Processes was curated by 4 MA students of the MA in Culture, Criticism and Curation. And the exhibition aimed to showcase and to make visible the work of PhDs at Central St. Martin, showing the richness and diversity of their research practices. And it has been very stimulating and interesting and thought-provoking to have a conversation with PhD alumni, MA students and member of staff at CSM around research practices. And because this is the last of these events, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you, everyone involved with the exhibitions, its organization, and with the staff development, and also with the organization of these events, for which we have a recording, and which have been extremely rich in the way they have addressed research. Also, a big thank you to Lynn Finn to helping with the hosting of this series of events. And without further ado, I would like to welcome and introduce Rachel Marsden, who is going to chair tonight's session. Thank you for joining and hope you will enjoy tonight. Rachel.
Thank you, Katerina, and welcome everybody. It's great to see so many friends and colleagues and people join us this evening. I wish I could see all of your faces, but I acknowledge your presence. Just to point out that this event is being recorded and it will be put on the UAL's research platform through YouTube and available afterwards. Also to let you know, there is a Q&A chat box at the Q&A box at the bottom to ask questions, and the chat box too, so feel free to use either to ask questions throughout, which I hope to get to in time. I'm just going to give an introduction and then we'll move into the first part of the session. So I want to start with a gratitude practice, so thanking all of you for coming here today. To all the visible and invisible domestic labours that help me and us get here today, and to my panel speakers and Thomas, the BSL interpreter too. So my name's Rachel Marsden. I'm an associate lecturer and curator here at UAL, and I'm very much interested in methodologies of care, care practices, ethics of care, and disability justice in the context of cultural work and cultures of work. So as Katerina has just stated, this is the last event as part of the associated public programme for Invisible Processes, which showcased the work of PhD students at Central St Martin's at UAL. And in the workshops developing the project, so that was through the research practices sessions, care became a recurring theme, and it came across a wide-ranging set of contexts, becoming a priority to ask here, what do we mean by care in research? So prior to inviting the speakers, so Despina, Adriana and Sasha to introduce themselves, I want to acknowledge the involvement, work and research of two colleagues who couldn't join for this event this evening, Annabelle Crowley and Janine Francoise, who have helped shape today's event. Their voices are key and have helped to underpin and holistically shape today. So please do look into their work afterwards. And I'm hoping you, the audience, can also provide some wider discussion too. So I just want to take a moment for each of the speakers to introduce themselves. So Adriana, do you want to go first and introduce yourself?
Yeah. It says I cannot start my video. Can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, start my video. Perfect. And now can you see me?
We can.
Great. Yeah, so hello. I am Adriana Kobo Corey. I am an architect by training, and I am a special practitioner and a researcher in the connection between taste, performance, and architecture, specifically public space, which has been my focus in my latest practice. I am currently working for CSM as an associate lecturer for the master's program in architecture. And I am also a research fellow for the T-Factor project that is run by Adam Thorpe in Central St. Martin's. And my interest in this subject that Rachel and everyone have been really generous to invite us to discuss and to share with everyone is because I am intrigued, and I've been working on practices of maintenance and ideals of cleanliness and how they relate to architectural practice. So that's what underpinned the whole work in my thesis that is being showcased in the exhibition, as Katerina explained, and that is why I'm here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adriana. Despina, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello everybody, good afternoon. I'm Despina Hadjilouca. I'm a designer by trade, but by day I work at Central St Martin's, and I'm the program administration manager for product, ceramic and industrial design. I'll focus on my interest within care later on in my presentation because it links with my slides. So that's it from me for now.
Thank you, Despina. And Sasha, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Sasha Burkhanova-Khabadze. I position myself at the moment as an artist, independent researcher, and curator. I'm also a director of an independent not-for-profit organization in London, Exposed Arts Projects. And what we do, we provide a space for artists to experiment and work on their self-discovery through art projects. So no borders, only exploration and experiment. In my research, in my PhD research, which I just completed my viva, so got it, finally a PhD. My research looked into the professional ethic of contemporary art curating, and the angle which I was curious to explore was the following. I made this proposition that the way how artistic or curatorial ethic becomes professionalized is basically by taking your very own principles, things that drove you through curating and through art practice, and making them into your professional ethics, making them your work principles. So I was looking into that transition and what happens like in the due course, how those change and what's the consequences and bad things that happen along the way. So today I will be talking about the experience, about the notion of care, how those came through my PhD research and my curatorial and artistic practice. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I'm really excited to see what discussion comes out of all your research and your perspectives this evening. I'm just going to give a little introduction to how I'm going to set up the space of engagement for this session before we jump into the short examinations of practice. So for the next hour or so, I want to encourage everyone to engage in active listening. So encountering and noticing, and an idea of slow practice as well around what we're thinking about. So to think and challenge and to come at this both gently and critically. So to give voice and also to respect each other in this space and on the subject. We want this to be speculative and propositional. So to ask questions, and we're not necessarily about conclusions here, it's more about opening up the discussion of care. So there's 3 parts to this session. The first is around practice. So each of the speakers will share an insight into their practice for around 10 minutes each. We're then going to move into an open discussion, which involves you, the attendees of this event too. And then the last part, we're going to engage in a moment of pause and active listening. So we're going to slow down and each read an excerpt, a short text that we've chosen in relation to care. These will also be shared in the chats with citations, so you can read and engage with them at your own time as well. So what do we mean by care? I thought I'd try and start to set up the space with some questions and a couple of quotes. So is it an affection? Is it a moral and ethical obligation? Is care work? Or as Bella Casa states in her book, Matters of Care, is it something we can learn or practice? Is it something we can just do? So it must be noted that this event was originally supposed to take place in person, where being on screen has given a different agency to the event tonight. And it makes me think about the awareness of one's body, our body in space, our lived experiences, our ways of being in the world. Also thinking from an embodied and intersectional standpoint. And I want to quote Uzma Ribzi's chapter here on decolonization as care, where it's important for us to think through how we might make sense of the many different ways we might imagine past bodies or othered bodies or any body that is not a normative privileged body. And some of that I think is going to come through the discussion this evening. So I'd like to invite Adriana to present about her practice first.
Hello again. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen with everyone. And I hope you can see my screen now. And I am going to, that's it. Is that visual and nice for everyone?
Yes, it's great.
Good. Okay, so first, I just want to reiterate my thank you for being invited to participate in this event, and to say that this is exciting for me because I've been doing research in my own field, which is architecture and spatial practice, but the work in the exhibition and the associated events, including this panel that this exhibition has designed and has allowed to happen, have been an opportunity which is rare to connect with people from other fields and other places within the UAL and within Central Saint Martin's, other colleagues which are very interested in the same subjects, but you don't necessarily cross paths with. So, so thank you for that. Now, what do we mean by care? In my specific case, for me personally, I am interested in some of the questions that Rachel posed to us at the beginning of working for this panel. One is, what about invisible labor? What strategies or practices are making invisible labor visible? And I've dedicated some time to that. And the other one is, how do we question institutions in terms of their care practices? And specifically for the second theme or issue, I am keen to explore the aesthetics of care-led practices, especially in connection with institutional critique within architecture. I'd like to start where it all started for me, which is with Le Corbusier, which, as some of you might know, was the most prominent figure of 20th century architecture, the leader of the whole modernist movement. And in his book from 1927, Towards a New Architecture, he made a whole justification of the new aesthetics of modernism, and based on function of integrating the machine and the power of industrialization within architectural design. And for him, everything of the past had to be wiped out or washed, and we all had to contribute to this project. We had all got to wash in order for the old, as you can see in the image to the right of the screen, which has some shades in black. That was old for him, with chimneys, with smoke, etc., to be turned down, basically, to make a space for his urban renewal plans, which are to the right of that image, where the sun and the air were allowed between buildings, and buildings looked like modernist concrete slabs with a lot of green in between. So we had all got to wash and clean in order to make that ideal kind of city and of environment happen. Now, for me, we all know the consequences, the dark consequences of that kind of architecture that took on the peripheries of cities and basically made public space impossible to use other than in a contemplative way, a patch of green open space. So for me, it was important to investigate how these cleaning practices and notions of cleanliness and sanitation play out in our contemporary public spaces. And so for my PhD, I situated all these interests and all these questions and concerns within Granary Square, the prime public space of the privatized King's Cross State, where we sit in Central St. Martin's. And how do these practices play out? As a PhD student based at Central St. Martin's, I spent countless amounts of hours either walking through or contemplating Granary Square and listening to the fountains in the background as the kind of like a soundtrack of my life, because I was in the Granary building. And as I observed life pass by on Granary Square, there was one use or function or activity that was missing for me, given my Latin American background, which was given the amount of water resourced in that space. People were not washing their clothes in public space, which would have happened in my country. And so I decided to start staging a series of laundry sessions ad hoc, without any impromptu, on the square. And so I did. And what happened was that this actually evolved into a series of encounters with the guards, the security guards and the maintenance wards of Granary Square and the King's Cross estate. And these allowed me to start thinking that though I had envisioned my practice to be collaborative with other artists and other members of my own field, actually my collaborators should be the maintenance guards of Granary Square or the public realm within the King's Cross stage. And so from this project, I moved on, and this is comprised in time. That move took about 1.5 years to collaborate with the actual cleaners, the maintenance workers of Granary Square, because they do perform in a different way than doing the laundry, but they do perform the cleaning function and use daily with for hours in front of all of us, but they are kind of rendered invisible within the public domain that we are so used to live by. And so the negotiation to have them as my collaborators took like 18, 19 months, but finally here we are, working together, learning from what they do when they are cleaning the square. And they are invisible, they are not featured as middle class, you know, like financially sound people with a lot of acquisitive power to buy a lot of stuff within the King's Cross State's retail opportunity, if you want, are featured in the website and all over the King's Cross State. Well, they are not that featured. And I thought maybe because their practices, though they are instrumental in the maintenance of that space and that environment, as a model for contemporary public space, is not featured. The practice is not featured, is not visible, is somehow rendered invisible. For me, and based on the work of Laderman Ukeles and Oscar Muñoz, who both work Ukeles on maintenance practices in art and performance, and Oscar Muñoz with the medium of water in portrait in art specifically, I saw that the traces that they made with their ride-on sweepers were actually as if they were drawing. So I started trying to translate their practices into drawing, because for me, as they cleaned, they drew. And if we devised some drawings that were legible by the art community who are trained to read images drawn, and perhaps they could acquire a bit more visibility. So that is what we endeavored ourselves for 6 months in fortnightly rehearsals, and that is a performance that we did, and that is the result drawing of that. And when we finished this project, then I felt, okay, this is in any case a restricted group, very much within the Granary Square, King's Cross area, with collaborators which are employees of the King's Cross estate, and I felt I need to open this towards the surrounding community, and to understand the history of an area that was now motivated by a narrative of what's new, of renewal, of innovation in terms of urban design and new urban projects. So I crossed the rails and went to Somerstown and started walking towards that area, because actually Central Samaritan sits officially in the ward of St. Pancras and Somerstown, not King's Cross. So in my walks through Somerstown, I discovered some communal public spaces, open air spaces that were dedicated to, as you can see here, airing the laundry. And I got very intrigued by these spaces, and to cut the story short, I understood these were spaces that were very embedded within the childhood memories of many of the residents of Somerstown. And in here you can see some depictions of childhood memories where the airing courts feature very much, and they were decorated by Gilbert Bayes, a very famous sculptor at the time. And he did finials for the airing posts in many different shapes and forms, including birds, as you can see here to your right on the screen. And so I started looking for collaborators to do a project around this, and they had been the ones who had painted these depictions of childhood memories within the airing courts of Somerstown and those public spaces in the other side of the tracks. And I thought there's a maintenance practice here, which is that happens when people get together and chat. This is the Stitch and Knit Club that happens in the St. Pancras Community Association every week on Thursdays. So I joined them, their knitting group, and they were maintaining the histories and the embedded motives that constitute their lives by chatting about them. And one of the themes was the airing courts and the paintings of childhood memories that they had been doing. So I decided to turn one detail, that little bird of one of those paintings, into a crochet pattern. And we started making them with crochet squares, which are called classically granny squares. So this was the Granny Square project, which is the one featured in the gallery. And we started knitting together with different kinds of groups and people of all ages and capacities, and replicating the histories and the memories and the stories that the residents told us. And we brought this to the Lethaby Gallery, and this is what is hanging there. And for me, this was yet another practice of care, because it's a practice of maintenance that that allows to, wait a minute, I am going to stop sharing my screen. That allows for different readings of a space than those that are dominant, such as those that the King's Cross state, with all the newness, the new celebrated kind of architecture and urban design sustained in the narratives of these kind of spaces. So through these projects for my PhD, what I tried to articulate was a practice different from that of modernism, by which you have to wipe out or devise carefully controlled and maintained sanitized spaces, and to try and understand how could we make of cleanliness and practices of maintenance an alternative way of looking at what we do as architects and spatial designers, with bearing always in mind the enhancing of the visibility and of those whose labors are usually invisible, either from home or in public space. I think that's all from now. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana. I think that beautifully set up the space. Also makes me think about Janine's voice and sharing when we had a discussion around this, and her work into institutional labours, also thinking about maintenance and creating safe spaces, and how do we maintain and the maintenance around those safe spaces. So I wanted to acknowledge Janine's voice in this. And I'm going to come back to in the discussion, I think, around the narrative of renewal as well, because I think that's a really important area when we're thinking about space and architecture too. So thank you. I'm going to invite Despina to share next. Attendees and audience, please do share comments or questions in the chat box and in the Q&A too, so we can revisit them in the discussion. But I'll hand over to Despina now.
Hello. So my background as a designer is in narrative environments, from which I slowly moved into participatory design and then socially engaged design, always within the urban environment and intentionally working on small scale projects in the UK and Cyprus, where I'm from. I'd like to admit at this point that in contrast with the panelists and the other speakers, my interest around care was ignited relatively recently. So my presentation may not have the depth that the rest of you will present. So I just ask you to bear with me. The two images I'm going to share with you this evening are from two series of conferences I co-curated, Narrative in Practice and Socially Engaged Design Conference. Both are connected to our topic this evening, but in different ways. So I'm going to share my screen. So there we go. So this first project is still work in progress, and therefore the end result.
We can't see your slides, Despina.
Oh, okay. Okay, Zoom seems to have crashed.
Do you want to try stop sharing and resharing? See if
yes. I can't seem to go onto the Zoom. That's the problem. Sorry, guys. Apologies.
No apologies needed.
So I'm gonna. Yeah, there we go. So it should work now.
Yeah, we can see your desktop.
Great. Okay. So this is a project, as I was saying, that is still work in progress, and therefore the end result may differ from what you see now. So this is Narrative in Practice, or as we call it, NIP, affectionately. It started its life as a non-academic symposium in 2011 with 3 biannual installments, which were co-curated with Dr. Nina Honeybo and Japan-based designer Yuki Nagasawa. The events explored and mapped the application of narrative theory in creative practice in fields such as architecture, exhibition design, product and industrial design, service design, and design for public space. Specifically, they looked at uses of narrative, storytelling as a tool, the notion of narrativity, authorship and co-authorship, and how new opportunities for narrative use in creative practice can be encouraged. So Narrative in Practice ran its course as a symposium format. The curatorial team is currently working on transforming it into an ever-evolving online platform and network where users will be encouraged to share their work in progress. And this is quite important for us, where we are looking, of course, for finalized pieces, but we're much more interested in how work evolves. And by work, we mean both research and practice. As the concept was being developed and the platform was being designed, one of the main discussions we were having was the need for this to become a rather slow-paced space, so that the curatorial process and, as an extension, the participants and readers' experience was mainly based on the care for the material and the content. The platform's aim is to take time to reflect on the work submitted, pay attention and understand the context, acknowledge the complexity of narrative theory, and therefore acknowledge its contribution. So I'm going to now move on to image number 2. So hopefully this will work. Yeah, there we go. So this is, it's a snapshot from a roundtable discussion during our last Socially Engaged Design conference in 2019, which is the second in the series, The conference is based in Cyprus and is co-curated with Omiros Panagidis and Dr. Marina Hadjilouca. In contrast to Narrative in Practice, this is an academic event with proceedings and publication. It looks to investigate the broad arena of socially engaged practices, opening up to different thematics each time. So including, but not limited to, art, design and politics, socially engaged practices and democracy, and social cities. The conference is closely linked to my interest, so exploring the role of socially engaged practices in the urban landscape and how cities can offer a balanced social experience while preserving the everyday idiosyncrasies. I'm interested in the link between social design, cities and care. However, I'd like to look beyond forms of care such as design for public medical welfare, the end of life care, design for death, and focus specifically on the strength of localized social relations in the urban environment. So without dismissing the challenges, obviously, and complexities of urban informality, as well as the need for legal designs, I'm interested in informal modes of care within neighborhoods, such as mutual support, solidarity, common urban life. In addition to all this, the entanglement of the notion of care with ecologies, histories and cultures. So Jesse's talk about nurturing care through community-based models. I would like to take this concept even further and highlight that through the development of communities of care, we are creating and offering active citizenship. And like, shouldn't care be intertwined with one's urban experience? I would like at this point to reference Anne Light and Yoko Akama, who say they have understood care as existing in the practices of creating space for people to come together to re-examine relationships, remake their environments, reimagine familiar places, and to reflect, learn, and debate about making futures. So as I conclude this little presentation, I'd like to put on the table 2 points, which for me beg for discussion. First of all is the build of trust as part of designing for care. And second is care and politics, particularly if we are discussing care in the public sphere. So that's it from me. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Despina. So many things raised there that have become almost like prompts, I think, for further discussion, and overlaps with Adriana's too, just in raising things around slow pace, also the role of socially engaged practice, and also the relationship, I think, to human and non-human things here. So that entanglement that you're speaking of, that I think is really fundamental to and central to care, is that it's just not one entity. It's, you know, involved in and as part of many beings and spaces and existences. I'm interested to discuss more around active citizenship too, because I think that plays an important role. One thing I thought was that you started to kind of queue up as well is when you were talking about design in relation to medical welfare and palliative care as well. So the role of care, or how care is medicalized and often thought of through a medical lens. So I think that's another area we could also discuss so much, and we've only got an hour and a half. So thank you. I want to invite Sasha now to share her practice.
Thank you so much. So I also share my screen. Can you see
that? Yeah.
That's great. I'll do it. Oh, yeah. So what about care, and what do I think about it, and where I come from to this kind of thinking? As I said, the two cases I will be talking about today in my presentation come from my PhD research. And my PhD research basically looked into the formation of such a notion as a professional ethic of a curator. And why I found it so curious to explore was that being a practicing curator myself for over 10 years now, I find myself working in an environment which claims itself to be called a profession. Curation is a profession. But at the same time, we don't have such a thing as a professional ethic that is given to us in a way that is there. There is one definition that we would all follow somehow. So starting with this interesting state of things, I wanted to interrogate how I personally become affected by the multiple theories of ethical practice that come over to me like through my actual day-to-day practice as a curator, as I work with various institutions. Some of them have their code of ethics, others don't. And some have very strong culture that is imposed on a curator who is a guest curator, some don't. And at the same time, I was curious to see how, as a curator who is also engaged in an academic setting and academic work as a researcher, I'm also subjected to certain kind of ethical regulations and protocols, and how those two fields overlap in one practice of a single individual. Also, I must say that my research the choice was to do it an autoethnographic research, which to say in the very basic words was that my practice was during those years as my PhD developed, was about trying to place myself in a tricky situation, ethically speaking, where I would need to make certain choices and see how the environment will respond. So in response to the notion of care, I today want to propose you this angle. I want us to think about this relation, institutional care versus personal care that becomes professional care, when the notion becomes professionalized, and then possibly with duration of time, it also becomes institutionalized. So when this transition happens, what changes with initial meaning that we put there when we say, I care personally? The two projects I wanted to talk about are the following. So the first took place in 2014-2016, and it was called "And Also Don't Tell Anyone Love is a Crime." And it was a collaboration between myself and wonderful artist and researcher, Dr. Alif Adil. The project took place at University of Greenwich because my initial my PhD initially started there before I moved to Central St. Martin's. About the reasons I will tell you in 1 minute. So the project departed from this idea. We wanted to interrogate, me and Aleph, who at that time at the beginning was my supervisor of my research. We wanted to interrogate what can we create if we at the same time occupy those two interesting positions. If I will be a curator of her work, her artistic projects, while at the same time she will be a supervisor of my studies at University of Greenwich. The thing how it all came to mind was that we found this interesting place in the regulations of the university, that this was the zone which was not very, people were not very pleased in our department for us doing it because they found it's unusual and not really necessary. But at the same time, we were not breaching any actual protocols in place, so we were not breaking the law or doing something that was not allowed to be done. So once we started exploring this relationship and started working on our project, we went through the sequence of really interesting situations in terms of defining care, personal care versus institutional. Because at a certain point, as you know, through the PhD, you go through this process of ethical committee approval for your project. And when you put all the papers together, you need to show that your project is basically thinking in a nice way and looking after all the participants that are involved in it. And then if you go through this ethical committee approval, it means your project is sound, legit, yeah, and you can go through and continue your work. It was interesting to me to discover that once our project was accepted in terms of ethical protocols of the university, after that, we started facing difficulties from the actual department where the research was taking place. So just for you to understand, it was not about breaking the rules, but it was about facing the disagreement of certain individuals who represented the department, that our project could not be taken further at that point. So ethical dilemmas that opened in that project to me, and which I also wanted to offer you to just for consideration, because this is not my aim in this presentation to give you answers, but more about like posing questions and opening the discussion about all these things, like when you provide care to your students as an institution, who then decides what is good for you, what is meant to be healthy for you, what is the healthy relationship with your supervisor, for example, or between curator as an artist and an artist. So here is the list of ethical dilemmas that we considered ourselves dealing with. We looked into choosing between curatorial professionalism and deprofessionalizing openness, because for me it was an experience to opening up to an artist who was hierarchically in a position of my supervisor. So it was this very shaky hierarchy between us, and it was interesting to explore. Also, this idea of becoming undone by a creative collaboration or terminate versus terminating it, because the way how this project finished, for at least like for the duration of my stay at University of Greenwich, we were given a choice. The choice was given to us by our department. We could either terminate the relationships as a supervisor and student in order to continue the project, or I will have to choose a different institution to continue my work, which I did, and at the end I moved to Central Samaritan. So that was interesting. And also the last point was about choosing personal ethics over institutional. Again, this is the question that probably many of us as at the same time academics and creative practitioners face. We come to our practice with lots of passion, we come with lots of love and drive and the desire to change things in a certain way in the world, both the big outside world and the academic world. And then when we see things that we don't really agree with, how do we act? Do we go softly or do we go hard? And this is something that also I want to keep you as an open notion to put your meanings inside. The second project I want to give you for consideration is this one. It was called What Can We Make and Become? And it took place at Central Samaritan's. It was the last project in a series of my PhD research projects. The practice part I did. And it was the collaboration between myself and 13 artists from MA programs, various MA programs at Central Samaritan's, and they all responded to participate via open call. So in this project, the situation with the notion of care was also highlighted in a very interesting way. The way how I usually curate projects, in the way how I think this is my technology, this is my methodology, how I work with artists usually, is about creating this space of openness and seeing what we as certain people with certain backgrounds, certain skills and certain interests can create at this place with this limitation of resources, and seeing like what comes out of this without really starting with the result and then seeing how can we actually achieve it. So it's a bit of from the other side, starting from the other side. What was interesting about this project, while I was preparing it with my collaborators, my artists successfully at the institution, exposed art projects which I direct, and the exhibition was great. We got great reviews, and all the boxes were ticked. Everyone was happy, and it was a comfortable way of preparing the show. At the same time, in a very interesting coincidence in time, this project took place almost at the same time as the students were preparing for the graduation show at the university. So in an unintended way, almost I must say, they got themselves in these situations when these two ideas of care, curatorial care of myself as a curator who offers this openness as a way to work, in a way coincided with the notion of curatorial care, which was offered to them by the university when you are motivated to create the best work of your life. You always need to keep in mind that this is your graduation show and people from galleries will come, your potential clients, your potential sponsors, your potential whatever important other next step in your career. This will be somehow related to the success of this exhibition for you. So this is a particular kind of pressure that an institution puts on a student in order to basically wish them the best, help them, make them to do the best work and get great benefits after that. So I was also wondering about like this need to balance these two kinds of care in a way, when you offer openness and when you offer restrictions. How does like this balance can be, how does this balance maintains, how it can be maintained, what should be prioritized, and how do we make this decision? And also like this ethical dilemmas came up in this project. So we interrogated this conflict between a researcher's versus a curator's definition of care. Also this idea of success and failure as coming from institution and a curator. Also this idea of why do we prioritize the work of an MA graduation show over preparation for our show? Why this sensible choice is made by us? And also this notion of prioritizing the value and importance of artistic process over its final outcome. How do we deal with those two things? Like, how do we prioritize? Just to finish my presentation, I wanted to offer you those two questions, like also for consideration, either in today's discussion or later on, because these are the two questions I'm currently dealing with, and I find them quite interesting. So the first question sounds like this: are we aware of the so-called dark side of the will to care, right? Like when we think that we want, we wish someone best, but then like how this idea of bestness, the idea of good for you, the idea of healthy for you is shaped. And the other question is this: are we really ready to make this transition from care, understood as this objective desire to give someone the good, the healthy, to something that may be called love, or maybe the other term is more suitable? Also help me here. And by love, I here mean this idea and the desire to undo oneself in the presence of another without really knowing or being able to predict the consequences of that. And how can we do it in curating or in art practice? I'm done here, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Sasha. And also I want to acknowledge that Sasha stepped in at the 11th hour to join this panel discussion as well, and has brought such an important voice and research that leads on and carries on from Adriana and Despina's. I think you've really in that sharing made us question the role of vocabulary and language and assumptions that are made around languages of care within research, within curating and curatorial practice. Also, you know, research processes of ethics. And I'm really, interested in this notion of becoming undone as well, and how that's integral to this notion of care. And at the beginning of this, when I was introducing the whole panel, I mentioned, is care affection? And I think that links in to what you were saying about care being objective and its relationship to love as part of this. I can see, Jenny, you've got some affirmation in the chat there regarding your presentation. So I'm going to invite all the speakers now to come on camera and on mic to have a panel discussion now and talk more in depth about some of those perspectives for around the next half an hour or so. As I've said before as well, attendees, do put your questions or perspectives into the chat or into the Q&A box. There's a separate Q&A box as well, but we can just use the chat if easier. I'm trying to think where to start, because there's so much rich perspective that we've had already within the three presentations. I'm wondering if we go back to think about the term and the role of maintenance, Adriana, at the beginning, and wonder if we've all got kind of further understandings of that in relation to our own work and research, because I feel like there's overlap across all three, certainly through the PhD experience and research experience, that notion of maintenance, specifically thinking about the supervisory relationship too. But I'd welcome your sharing.
Am I supposed to start?
You can, Adriana, if you want to. It's open. It's a fluid conversation.
For this panel, I've been thinking, what do I care for? kind of and linking with Sasha, no? Sasha's project is like focused on me, and is this self-reflection, no? How is it that I care, and what is it that I care for? And caring practices, I would say, and maintenance practices way before the institution in our lives. If I can, like, say, the professional institutions, not the institution of the family or the professional institutions, way before we enter into a life of professionalized, institutionalized practice. These caring maintenance practices start with our bodies from always. I mean, I cannot even put a beginning to that. So, but from infancy, we need to feed and clean and clothe and beautify our bodies, you know, and we are taught by our parents, and maintenance and care are taught and are practiced in repetition. There's a repetitive cycle of these. I mean, if some of us here in this panel are parents, have you brushed your teeth? Have you brushed your teeth? You know, and this is an endless question, and this is an endless practice, and this is an endless concern. Maintenance and care start with our bodies, and then with time, these practices expand to caring and maintaining our home in the practice sphere, in the private sphere, and then they continue to expand when we enter the institutionalized phase of our professions towards more public environments where we live and where we work, i.e. the city. For me, I am interested in that. So the maintenance practices that I am interested in exploring are actually based on exploring the connection between those maintenance practices that we exercise, that we take on at home and with our own bodies in a more private way, and the dynamics and enters gender inequality, etc., that those maintenance practices and the way in which we carry them on and the way in which they are recognized or institutionalized or rewarded play out within the practice, the private sphere, and how then that translates or connects with the way in which we care as professionals, in my case, for the built environment. How we design it, how we care for it, how is it that we articulate our practice to care for it. And my interest in care is way before and in maintenance. I mean, I've been working about this for like 7 years, but in the last couple of years, because of the intersections with climate emergency and all these, maintenance and care have become buzzwords. But outside of being opportunistic with this, I think, which bugs me a little bit, and perhaps I ask, we can open that. That's a question for me. This project of care and maintenance for me is an opportunity to articulate a practice that works with what is there, our body, the city, and as an architect, is almost a negation of the traditional ways in which my profession practices, because I don't want to make a new innovative built environment. I want to work transforming, however temporarily, what is there, and superimpose or layer temporarily a more caring kind of intervention and narrative, especially for public space. So now with the relation with the supervisors, or I mean, it can become hierarchical, and I think Sasha touched on that. In my case, it worked. It was not, I didn't even quite reflect on it, to be honest.
Okay, I think Despina and Sasha have got responses. I don't know who wants to go first.
Okay.
Sorry. Sasha, I'm more than happy for you to go ahead.
Okay, I'll just say maybe just because it really resonates with what Adriana said. Adriana, yes, thank you so much for basically grabbing this phrase from my mouth, because I wanted to just jump onto that. This idea of maintenance, like the first thing we think about the relationship with our body. And I personally, as an academic and a human with the body, right, always kind of feeling myself in this double position, because on the one hand, I'm always annoyed by my body because it really distracts me from the important thing, right? Like I need to write, I need to do my shows, I need to create my art, and for God's sake, I need to brush my teeth, feed myself, walk myself, like all those really annoying things that my body kind of asks me to do. But at the same time, this is really interesting thing to take also on a level of an institutional organism, if we can make this metaphor, because when we say maintenance, there could be two kinds of maintenance. One kind of maintenance we want to do. If we make this analogy, for example, we want to preserve our artifacts of the past. We believe in the value. We want to preserve the picture, the images by great painters, and we spend time and money and train people to do it. But at the same time, there is a kind of maintenance that we have to do. Just we really don't want to do this, but we have to do. And in a way, this is done to have the processes within the institution just going, because if there are no regulation, there is chaos and nothing goes in the right way. And in this, like as an example of these processes, of this kind of instruments of maintenance, which we don't really want to do, but we have to use, is this thing which can be called the code of practice, the code of ethics, the ethical committee approval paperwork, which you have to go through. So I'm wondering, and again, this is an open question, that maybe like we can take your example, Adriana, and the way how you used the cleaning machines that the basic job of cleaning the square, right, and took it to the level of an artwork. How can we, as people who are involved in the academic environment, not at this point as students, but as some other level, right? We are PhD, whatever we are now at this point, but at this level, can we somehow turn our ethical regulations and protocols and all those things of maintenance that we have to go through into a creative act or a research act, or somehow deal with them in a different way, not only as people who are, oh no, we have to do this paperwork again? So this is also the open question I want to offer you.
I think it was really interesting, Sasha, when you were talking about, you mentioned ethics as legitimizing. And so I'm really interested in questioning and pushing back against that legitimacy that we have to engage in as an act of maintenance within, say, an ethics of care practice, when that should become part of a practice in itself within the research, which I think can be quite entangled to articulate. But is in a way embodied, so it comes through this complexity which you've all spoken to, of how we engage in care through these personal and private and professional and public, all the P's, that comes through ritual as well and routine, and often becomes both transparent in our professional and public lives, but also I think hidden. Despina, did you want to come in with a response as well?
Well, I just wanted to raise the notion of time, actually. So within maintenance care, so I may be completely off piste here, but for me, it's all about slowing down. So you have to take the time to care. And also care happens over time. You can't force it. You can't jump over what's the in-between. So you have the start, your in-between, and the continuation of the journey. So all of this requires time, which in a way clashes with how we conduct our lives nowadays. everything happens so fast-paced. And I'm talking about professionally and also in our private lives. Again, going through our routines and also on our day-to-day work. It's almost frowned upon if you start taking time to care for what you do and reflect at the same time. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to throw that out there, more of as an open question. How do we deal with this? The fact that care is interlinked with time, and I don't think that you can separate the two. But how do you voice that to yourself and to others? And how do you create a framework within that's acceptable? That was my point.
And I think that comes into institutional critique, doesn't it? Also links to what you were saying, Sasha, as well, around binaries. And I'm going to link to a question that's come through on the chat around success and failure, and how that kind of notion of production that we engage in within our professional working worlds often goes against us if we want to slow down, and could be deemed as failure. But again, it's around challenging the language and action that we're engaged in. I'm just going to share the question that's in the chat. So it's an anonymous question. I found it really interesting how Sasha used binary oppositions as starting points to consider ethics in certain situations. And I think this has come through for many of the speakers, and also the wider discussions that we've had through research practices. I wonder if this relates to how we often think about care, i.e. either you care or you don't. And that's come through in what we've just discussed as well around public and private, personal and professional. I wonder if our speakers could speak to this stark and quite brutal way we might think about care. I don't know who wants to speak to that first. Sasha, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for this wonderful question. This whole idea of why do I feel so uncomfortable with binary thinking and what can I do with it, basically brought me into curation, because I think the curatorial position in the whole art process is the one where you are actually between things. You are not either or, but you are whatever you choose to be, or maybe it's my strange logic, but I think it works if you make it to work. But this idea of definitions, success and failure, right? I would also want us to take it like to a wider world discussion in a way, because very often, like once we start talking about it in a small group of people, and by small group of people, I mean like artistic community, like people who are driven by this idea of, yeah, we don't need this, success, failure, we just need to create, this is the purpose of art, yay. But then it's like once we join in this discussion with people like Arts Council, like people like those taxpayers whose money are basically like feeding the practice of artists, great artists in this country, I think we still need to have this criteria somehow there, success and failure. But the question is like, who is the stakeholder, who is the shareholder, who is actually taking time to define those things? Because at the moment, I think like this is the community like who is maybe only representing one side of the discussion, who is saying this is successful, this is failure. Whereas at the same time, like the other parts of the group, like who are the so-called visitors of the museums, the so-called patrons, the so-called people for whom we are making our public programs, but we don't really ask them about success and failure often enough. I feel that. I think like this is somehow the discussion that needs to be widened. I don't think the binaries should be broken just like that. I think it's about joining other voices in this discussion of redefining them. So something like that.
On mute, obviously. I think that really relates to as well within that complexity in the binary around the privileging as well of care, and how that can really impact and influence kind of what gets prioritized around care. And that's where socially engaged practice, some of the examples that you've shared today as speakers, I think show how you're trying to confront that privileging through acts and engagement that you're involved in through practice itself. Yeah, any other thoughts from the speakers on binaries?
I wanted to just dedicate some time to the Despina's bringing the issue of time to the table, because I think it's a very important one, and I very much agree with this. I mean, the issue of time. I am interested in performance, and so talking about binaries, performance in architecture is kind of transitory, temporary. The practice that I do is a water drawing that evaporates in 20 minutes and disappears, versus traditional architecture practice that stays there for centuries, right? So there's a clash in timings, if you want, and but also associated with this idea of time to care is, as you said, Rachel, the idea of productivity and eternal growth, and the growth-based economy that we all know the consequences of that, in spite of the consequences that we are living of that, gives financial power. And this is all a cycle by which, if we think about institutionalized practices of care, or care offered or devised from institutions, which define what care is or not, what practices are legitimate, good, aesthetically sound or not, that is all a system of power, right? So maintenance and care can be translated into the institutional framework that gives certain narratives of care and maintenance power. And that, again, is something that as a practitioner, I have to confront myself in terms of binaries. Do I use this power? How do I use it? Do I have it? Does this power kind of like make this balance, the balance that I want to create in terms of representation, visibility of labor, etc. Because I have to acknowledge, if I practice, and I practice as an academic within a powerful institution like CSM, that I have that practice, that power. So how do I use that power? Do I negate it? Do I translate it? How do I translate it? And I can't care for that, or I just can have, I have the option of not caring for this and not giving my time to that, not to be bothered, if you want. And in relation to practice, and I want to also bring up about something that Despina mentioned, which is informal modes of care, especially in the urban environment, which resonate with me because I am Latin American, and like informality is more part of our daily life in many different levels. That is again a question of power, right? We can care informally for a lot of things, but if that kind of care is not formalized, in many occasions is deployed of power. So I just wanted to say that.
Do you want to respond, Despina?
Yeah. I just wanted to say that that's why in my presentation I said I'm not dismissing at all the importance of having sort of legal designs and formalized ways of working. But yeah, exactly, because it's so often that informal outcomes or informal groups of work and communities can be subject to being, what's the word I'm looking for, manipulated, particularly by the powerful, the rich. So yeah, it's just kind of responding to that. Yeah.
I want to acknowledge, thank you, Despina. I want to acknowledge some of the perspectives that are coming through in the chat. So I'm just going to scroll through. There's some wonderful affirmation for all of you speakers. So do read through those. I'm just going to come to Francesco shared a question here saying, my initial provocation about what do we mean by care and whether care is something we can learn and practice or just do. And wondered if any of you had any views on this around whether it's something we can learn and practice or just do. And I wonder if that comes back to the idea of the body again that you've already spoken to, Adriana, in terms of that it's something that comes with us as we grow, as we age, as we get older. It's something that, you know, is enacted in our everyday. And I think the examples that you've shown as well in terms of practice is how care is practiced too. But there is this complexity around, yeah, what do we mean by care? I don't know if anybody has any responses to that.
I am reading Francesco's question here. So I am going to just answer to that as if I was speaking with him having a drink or a coffee. Yeah, I mean, like outside of all notions of practice and, you know, like the discourse and the jargon and blah blah blah. I think that we learn how to care. Mainly, this is something that perhaps we just do, but I would say that you are always learning how to do it better. From making your nails, you learn how to paint that bloody nail better and better every time you do it. It is then again a reiterative practice to being a mother, and almost you have to care to do that learning in order to fight. Sometimes you don't want to do it. Sometimes you don't want to care. Even for your children, you don't want to, as terrible as it might sound, and you have to do it. To care is almost an imposition, as Sasha was telling us about our bodies, right? Again, I have to go to the bathroom. It interrupts what I'm doing. I don't want to go wee, and it is an imposition. I have to care for the needs of my body and for the needs of others and for the needs of the practice that I've chosen to have. So I think we learn how to do it.
It's making me think of kind of care as a restorative practice, a renewal practice, a recovery practice, but not necessarily, as you say, a practice we want to engage in, but it's a process that we have to as well. Despina, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to sort of put side by side, again, taking on from Adriana's comment about things that you should care about, we know we should care about, but you have moments that you actually couldn't care less or you don't want to care. So that's where obligation, I think, in parallel to care comes in. So you have this notion of, you know what you should be doing, you know what is right, what is expected of you, and therefore that's the obligation for me. And then you have the care that is much more on a level of I feel that I want to care. It's much more, it's a deep-rooted sensation. So yeah, I just wanted to put those side by side and just say we have the sense of obligation, which shouldn't fall out of the arena of care, because it's also a form of care. But you also have the care that is it comes instinctively, and I guess it can touch sort of individual care, but also relational care.
It's making me think about because care has become this buzzword, this topic to which the world is capitalizing on. So it's become capital in itself, that it's actually been looked at in terms of careful. So I say full with 2 L's, not just one. So careful, how we can care fully, but also careless and carelessness. So again, coming back to that binary notion, 2 is part of it, but very much embedded within care as capital now. Sasha, did you want to respond?
So just like to answer to the initial question, the question was like, do we need to learn to care or does it come intuitively? My position is absolutely we need to learn. And the way how I felt, I found this answer was a few years ago. I was volunteering for the Royal Society of the Blind. And I remember like the months of paperwork and the months of training which took me to get accepted as a carer. And I remember like how I was taught how to help. And that was so very not intuitive, I must say, like the ways how I needed to act was so very not intuitive, not how I would do it if I would come and just do it. And the second point that I wanted to make was a strange memory that just came to me, and I just wanted to bring it here. The strange tension between those 2 things which exist in the legislation now, in the law. So basically, like if there is an accident and the person is hit by the car or whatever, and seems like they're dying on the pavement in front of you, and you are a lay person, and you try to help, and you make them worse, you don't go to jail. And that's called the rule of kind Samaritan, or I'm not sure, but something like that. That's the law. And there is another law which says that if you are standing next to them and you are a legally trained doctor and you don't help, you go to jail straight from there. You don't try to help, you go to jail. And I find it really interesting, like about how our system works, right? Because at the same time, we understand that there are certain ways of putting care, like in front, a trained care, like trained way of looking after certain situations. But then at the same time, we first and foremost prioritize this desire to take action, right? So intuitive care goes first in this case, I think, how I understand it. So again, I think this is just very interesting. But I think it's better to be trained, just not to hurt, even though you don't go to jail.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just making notes.
Can I ask Sasha a question? And I think it is related with a question here from Kirsty that mentions love. I mean, I am really intrigued, Sasha, by the. I mean, you asked us to help you think about another word, but that word that you've chosen, love. I mean, we're from there, right? And it's I don't know. It can, for me, opens a door towards the psychology of care, and I don't know if that is. Yeah, I would love to hear you elaborate on that.
Thank you for asking. And again, I didn't talk much about this because I didn't want to just say like, okay, this is my position. I either like it or don't like it. But if you ask me, let's imagine they're having a coffee and I can tell you. So to me, the whole idea of coming into art practice or curation is a very selfish idea, because instead of going and saving the world somehow by actual serious labor, just, I don't know, being an engineer or, you know, just building cities or helping people as a doctor, I chose to go to art practice, right? Which is a questionable choice in case you are really like interested in making the world a better place. There are more obvious choices. So I assume I went to do curatorial work because I love it so much, because I love people with who I work, and I love the things that I achieve by giving myself totally to the process. So in a way, I know that my intention is to change the world through my own understanding of what is the better world like, right? Again, it's very subjective. But at the same time, I'm confident that I'm doing this from a selfish position of a person in love to the process, right? So that's why I think I've chosen this word, because I just want to highlight that even though maybe from the side it looks like I'm a very given person, and I am a given person, I do it selfishly because I love doing it. And I think this is something that unites many curators, at least those whom I met and talked to.
Is it selfishly or is it selflessly?
Maybe a little bit of both.
Because I'm really interested in that selflessness that often comes with care, through care. But as you've just articulated, that it can come with a selfishness with it too, because of that interest or dedication or drive as part of it. Yes, Adriana.
Just a short notice just on that, Rachel.
Yeah.
Also takes us to the very vast philosophical discussion. I think we as human beings, which are brought up in this society in which we are in the contemporary world, are so individualized. We lost our tribe, we lost our community in a way, right? We search for it now, but we don't have it per se, like as before, like you just have this tribe sitting around the fire. So we lost it and really search for it. And I think the act of giving yourself away is a very natural desire for us at this point of time in our society. So again, like I think it is, I like the play of words you chose there. It's like the selflessness is selfish. We want to become selfless. We want to lose this freedom self, right? Because sometimes it's too tight for us. So maybe something about that.
Do you want to respond, Adriana? Then I'm very aware of time, completely escaped me, terrible as chair, that it's nearly 6:30, and I want to make sure that we have this moment of pause to go through our readings as well.
Maybe not, maybe not, you know, maybe we leave it for some. I just wanted to say that this selflessness for care, like of care, have rendered women very often powerless. That's all I wanted to say.
I think there are certain themes just in a few conversations there that I would love to continue to talk about, which is talking about gender, the role of gender there. Sasha also touched on the role of harm as well, and I know we haven't spoken about it in terms of harm or trauma and pain that often gets associated with care as well, and many of the perspectives as well in the chat that I want to thank everybody so much for sharing all your questions and comments that I'm going to share with the panel, and hopefully this just instigates some cups of coffee, some online chats, some meeting in person maybe, which would be brilliant. So I want to thank everybody for their time. If people can stay for 5 minutes, that would be lovely, just to hear their readings. If you can't, thank you for attending and joining us this evening. So Adriana, do you want to do your reading first, and then we'll go to Despina, Sasha, and then myself?
I've lost my quote. Sasha, Despina, can I go after you, please, while I find it?
Do you want me to put it in the chat?
Oh, no, I have it. Sorry about this. I have it. So yes, I will read the two quotes that I chose. So one is from Mirle Laderman-Ukeles in her Maintenance Art Manifesto of 1968. After the revolution, who is going to pick up the rubbish on Monday morning? And the other one is from Ruth Schwartz-Cohen in the book called More Work for Mother, The Ironies of Household Technology from the Open Heart to the Microwave. And it says, I associate dirt with poverty, with loss of control. And as a somnambulist, I am walking to the rituals and responding to the symbols that really meant something 70 years ago.
Thank you. Are you ready to share, Despina?
Sorry, mute wasn't unmuting. So my quote is from it's Adam Walker, and it's from his PhD thesis. It's called Ways of Being Beyond the Perpetuating Inequalities of the Technosphere, Textual Artistic Intervention as a Vital Strategy in Enabling Resistant Agency, or Embodying a Practice of Radical Care. So Not only does the extensive work of critical care affect that which might be thought in the moment as being the urgent act, but critical care must be cast forward into the future along with the act by both actor and potential affectee, that an expansion of critical care might be intuitively intended to be the future result of the immediate radical act by the actor is premised on their preceding commitment to critical care. This is vital in holding the intent of the act away from either self-interest or nihilism. And then it just continues, so I'll just keep it here short so that we don't completely run out of time.
Thank you, Despina. Sasha, do you want to go?
Yes, thank you. So what I'm going to read is the final paragraph from Curating with Love by Pascal Guillen. To conclude, the loving curator puts his own identity and certainly his own brand name on the line. He allows his hard work to dissolve into the outerless common. In caring for the others, he loses himself so that he may fully live up to the original meaning of his own name, curare. Just as the classical museum curator could become completely absorbed by and for his institution, so too, the independent curator might completely disappear behind the artists in whom he believes, the society, the audience he serves, or the political and artistic idea for which he stands. Only then, with these protagonists of the contemporary art, will be able to step out of the competitive logic of a hectic succession of projects and self-promotion in order to synchronize with the collective rhythm of the present. It may be incidental, but perhaps only then will this independent curator be less lonely.
Thank you. And one final one from me. I'm trying to share them in the chat with the citations too, so people can follow up. So this is taken from a book called Careless, a supplement to On Care, which is by Sharon Kivland and Gemma Blackshaw, and it's a chapter by Amy Peace Buzzard, but I'm just going to read the final lines. When I dust, I visit parts of my home that have often been forgotten. I look up, stretch my limbs to touch corners of ceilings. I navigate the planes of my home with an incessancy that is not found in my day-to-day. I look upon this space anew. In this relationship between me and the residue of myself, I attend to both my home and myself. I sweep peace into both our crevices. I quieten. We are both still. Thank you, everybody, for joining this evening, and I appreciate you staying on for an extra 4 or 5 minutes. I'll just put these quotes in the chat for you. And do follow up with any of us individually regarding any conversations today.
And thank you, Rachel, and the panel for this amazing conversation and for such wonderful insight. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. And I also want to give special thanks to Thomas, our wonderful interpreter, who's had to work very, very hard for an hour and a half. So thank you very much. And thank you to Rachel as well for sharing.
And thank you, Market.